Hello, welcome to Library Connection, story time for all ages. I'm glad you've joined me today. I'm Mandi Cantrell, Youth Services Director at the B.B. Comer Memorial Library here in Sylacauga. The first book I want to read is called Whoosh, Lonnie Johnson's Super Soaking Stream of Inventions. It's written by Barton and illustrated by Don Tay. I think you'll really enjoy this story about a famous inventor from our own home state of Alabama. Every day brought a challenge for young Lonnie Johnson, the challenge of finding space for his stuff. 6 Johnson kids were squeezed into their parents' small house in Mobile, Alabama. Lonnie would have loved a workshop of his own, but there just wasn't room. There was nowhere to keep his rocket kits, bamboo shooters, rubber band guns, erector set, go-kart engine, bolts and screws and other spare parts his dad let him bring in from the shed, and various other things he'd hauled back from the junkyard. Lonnie loved building and creating. Ideas for inventions just kept on flowing. He learned how to make rockets from scratch. Kids at school gathered to watch Lonnie launch them, and he learned how to make rocket fuel. When it caught fire in the kitchen, Lonnie's mom didn't make him stop. She just sent him to work outside. Lonnie wanted to spend his life designing things, building things, and getting them to work. He wanted to be an engineer. However, Lonnie took an exam that said he would not make a very good one. His dream had been challenged. Lonnie was discouraged, but he knew that whoever had graded his test hadn't met Linux. Inspired by a TV show, Lonnie had built his own robot. He made it out of scrap metal and named it Linux. Compressed air cylinders and valves allowed Linux's body to turn and its arms to move. The switches came from an old broken jukebox. Lonnie used a tape recorder to program Linux, and as a bonus, the reels looked like eyes. Lonnie wanted to enter his creation in a science fair, but he couldn't get the transmitter to work. Without it, Lonnie couldn't send commands to Linux. Science fairs came and went. Lonnie missed one and then another, until he got an idea. Now, Lonnie may or may not have asked before he borrowed his little sister's walkie-talkie. But it fixed the transmission issue. His school's team took freshly finished Linux to a 1968 science fair at the University of Alabama, where only 5 years earlier, African-American students hadn't even been allowed. Having to compete in a place that still wasn't very welcoming, now that was a challenge with a capital C. Against other schools from all over the state, Lonnie's team won first place. Soon, Lonnie left home to go to college at Tuskegee Institute, where he stood out as a self-confident, insightful, creative thinker. He stood out as a student who asked the right questions, precisely defined problems, and formulated solutions. And he stood out as the guy who built his own booming sound system out of cast-off electronics. It even had lights that flashed in sync with the beat. Lonnie sometimes studied right in the middle of his own parties. The extra studying paid off. He became an engineer after graduation, and that took him beyond Alabama, way beyond. When NASA was sending an orbiter and probe called Galileo to Jupiter, the space agency needed to ensure a constant supply of power to the orbiter's computer memory. The engineer who had to figure out how to do it was Lonnie. His challenge was to come up with a lightweight backup system able to keep essential functions going in case the main power was lost. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't obvious. But Lonnie found a solution. Some at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory doubted his idea would work. Lonnie convinced them that it would. He was right. As it photographed Jupiter and its moons, Galileo was supported by the power package that Lonnie designed. Much of what we know about Jupiter could have been at risk in a power failure if not for Lonnie. Ideas for other problems to solve just kept on flowing. They flowed whether Lonnie was working with hundreds of people at NASA or up late tinkering with his own inventions in, finally, his own workshop. Lonnie knew the world's millions of refrigerators and air conditioners needed a new cooling system, one that didn't use R12, a chemical that was bad for the environment. He had an idea for using water and air pressure instead. To test his idea, he made a pump and nozzle, connected them to the bathroom faucet, turned on the faucet, turned on the pump, and then, whoosh! The stream that blasted across the bathroom was so powerful, it created a curtain-swirling breeze. It also gave Lonnie an idea for yet another invention. This, he thought, would make a great water gun. First, he had to find or make the parts, including a pump small enough for a child to handle. Then he had to glue the parts together into a prototype, an early version with room for improvement. Finally, Lonnie tested his strange-looking squirt gun at a picnic. "Does it really work?" a man asked. "Sure," Lonnie said. "Want to see?" Lonnie worked the pump, which squeezed air into a chamber. When he pulled the trigger, the air escaped, forcing water out with a whoosh. For a water battle to be a fair fight, there couldn't be just one of Lonnie's wonder guns. He needed help making more. So he went to toy company after toy company after toy company. The word no flowed again and again, but finally one company said yes, it planned to make his water gun. Lonnie also had other projects, a water-propelled toy airplane, 2 kinds of engines, and his cooling system. He found investors to provide the money for turning his ideas into products people could buy. He made a leap of faith, quit his day job, and devoted himself to full-time inventing. But soon, each plan fell apart, even the one for the water gun. These things sometimes happen, but when they happen one after another to the same person, well, that's some pretty bad luck. Lonnie didn't have a job. He didn't have the money he'd been counting on. He and his family had to move out of their home and into a little apartment. He was angry and scared. But Lonnie had dealt with challenges all his life. He knew a lot about solving problems, and he still believed in his inventions, especially the water gun. Lonnie went looking for another toy company. In 1989, he found a toy maker who was interested in seeing the water gun if Lonnie ever happened to be in Philadelphia. "But don't make a special trip," the guy said. Lonnie made a special trip. In his wife's suitcase, he carried a new prototype. He unpacked it, filled the tank with water, pumped the gun until the air pressure was good and high, and whoosh! And wow! They were wowed. Kids everywhere agreed with that wow. Lonnie's water gun, called the Super Soaker, became a smash hit. In no time, there were Super Soakers in backyards and on beaches, in parks and on playgrounds. Each sale of a Super Soaker put a little money into Lonnie's pocket. So what did Lonnie do? He got a bigger workshop, which is where you will find him today, because facing challenges, solving problems, and building things are what Lonnie Johnson loves to do. And his ideas just keep on flowing. Thank you. Join me after the commercial break for another great book.
WOTM is the television provider for all Alabama High School Athletic Association championship events and special programs. WOTM is your home for the Super 7 football, state finals basketball, baseball and softball state championships, the AHSAA weekly show, and WOTM also produced the first ever football playoff show, Super 7 preview show, and reclassification reveal show. Your exclusive home for all things AHSAA is WOTM. Contact your local cable provider to request WOTM to your channel lineup.
A funeral service represents a family's final farewell to their loved ones. Knowing this, we go beyond what is expected to ensure the ceremony is beautiful and memorable, a truly fitting tribute to that special life. We invite you to visit us to meet our staff and tour our renovated facility complete with a new dining area and catering services. We've been serving the people of this area for over 40 years, and we think that you'll be pleased to find that making lasting impressions remains our first priority. Curtis & Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg.
things a little bumpy in your driveway? Ox Foundation Solutions has the expertise and the know-how to repair cracks, wet basements and crawl spaces, and uneven floors in your home. Ox Foundation Solutions will come up with the right fix for you. It's time to get strong. How strong? Ox Strong. Get a free estimate from Ox Foundations.
Marble City Pharmacy in Sylacauga is your destination for the highest quality health care. Our knowledgeable pharmacists are always available for questions about your medications or advice on taking over-the-counter products and supplements. Our friendly staff can assist you in choosing from our full lines of compression hose and medical equipment. And don't forget our gift department. We have a great selection of unique gifts for every occasion. Stop by and see us today. Marble City Pharmacy, here for life.
Welcome back to Library Connection. The next story I want to share with you is called Wonder Horse by Emily Arnold McCully. It is the true story of the world's smartest horse. Very interesting for all you horse lovers out there. Bill Key was born a slave on a plantation in 1833. Even as a little boy, he had a special way with animals. He could soothe and he could cure just about any creature. After Bill grew up and slaves were freed, he became a veterinarian. He was called Doc Key. Most of his patients were horses. In those days, horses did the hauling, pulling, and carrying, and they were often abused. Few people realized that animals had feelings. Bill believed in treating every animal with kindness. "Put down your whip," he would say to a farmer trying to get his tired horse to move. Bill stroked the spot on the animal's neck where its mother had once nuzzled. All creatures like kindness, Bill advised. His methods worked, and his reputation spread. Doc created a medicine called Keystone Liniment. It worked on colic, lameness, cramps, and headache in both humans and animals. His liniment made him rich. Doc bought a hotel and a restaurant. After he bought a racetrack, he wanted to own the fastest horse in the country. One day, he heard that a circus was selling its animals. Doc went to see if a racer was among them. He noticed a beautiful mare with a distinctive profile, an Arabian. Doc thought, Arabians were known for speed and intelligence, but she looked frightened. There were marks on her flanks where she'd been whipped. Doc bought her for $40. Doc loved his new horse, Loretta. She was the smartest horse he'd ever known. He found a champion stallion to father her foal. Then he waited for his future champion to be born. But the new foal had twisted legs and a mottled, homely coat. Doc thought the foal was too weak to survive, so he called him plain old Jim Key. Worse, the birth used up Loretta's strength. Doc tried desperately to save her, but Loretta died. Doc's heart closed shut with grief. No one could console him, not even his dogs, who waited for Doc to throw a stick for them to fetch. Meanwhile, little Jim Key tried desperately to stand on his crooked legs. His bright black eyes begged Doc not to lose hope in him. One day, Doc felt a nudge on his shoulder. It was Jim Key with a stick in his mouth. "You want to play fetch?" Doc smiled for the first time in weeks. He threw the stick, and Jim stumbled after it. The foal had never taken more than 2 steps. Jim picked up the stick and tottered back. He trotted a few feet. Offering the stick, he spread his lips in a grin. "You're trying to cheer me up, aren't you?" Doc asked. After Doc and the dogs went inside his house, he heard loud knocking on the front door. It was Jim. "Okay, Jim, you win," Doc said. He made Jim a bed on the floor of the spare room. The colt slept there every night until he was too big for the doorways and too heavy for the floorboards. Then Doc took his own bed out to the barn. Almost everything Doc did, Jim tried to do too. Jim figured out how to unlock the paddock gate. He opened the drawer where Doc kept apples, ate them all, and then shut the drawer. When Doc laughed at his antics, Jim seemed to laugh too. "I wonder what else you could learn," Doc said. Jim lifted his chin as if to say, "Try me." Doc decided to take time off from selling liniment. Doc taught Jim one lesson at a time, repeating it and rewarding Jim with apples or sugar. First, Doc wrote the letter A on a card. He said A aloud, then put the card in Jim's lips, held them shut, and patted his neck. It took many months, but Doc never lost patience. Finally, when Doc asked Jim to fetch the A, Jim did it. They proceeded to B, then to C, until Jim knew the whole alphabet. In the following years, Jim learned to count and to pick out the primary colors. One day, watching Jim add and subtract, Doc cried, "Jim, we should go on the road. People will be amazed by how much you know. They will see that animals have feelings, and it's wrong to make them suffer." "Wonder if Jim can do that in front of strangers," one of Doc's farmhands said. "Might just be sensing what you want him to do, not learning at all." Doc knew that Jim had truly been educated. He arranged for a show to prove it. At first, the audience couldn't believe their eyes, but soon they were gasping and cheering. Jim Key loved being the star of the show. The bigger the audience, the more he hammed it up. Jim spelled, made change from a cash register, danced to music, and bowed to ladies in the audience, flicking his tail and grinning. Jim and Doc traveled to fairs, small-town theaters, and big city arenas. But one day, Doc saw a newspaper headline, "Is Horses' Intelligence a Fraud?" The story asked, how could a little old black man with no education teach a dumb animal to do those things? The next day, there were hecklers in the audience. "This is all a trick," one shouted. "Some people are offended by your brain power," Doc said to Jim, "but children believe in you." Doc asked the local Board of Education to close the schools for a day so that every child in town could come to the show. The board replied, "We can't close our schools for horse shows or monkey shows." The insult made Doc more determined. "Jim, we have to find a sponsor. We can't fight prejudice all by ourselves." Doc wrote to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. "Let us team up. Jim can help spread your message." "What if your act is a hoax?" they wrote back. "People already call us foolish for teaching kindness to animals." Doc invited them to come see for themselves, and they agreed, as long as the demonstration was secret. The big day arrived. Doc and Jim waited and waited, but no one showed up. Doc said, "I have another idea." Doc invited a team of professors from Harvard University to examine Jim Key and decide if he was really educated. The professors agreed. "You must wait outside while we examine Jim," they told Doc. They led Jim inside and shut the door. Doc waited patiently, and a crowd gathered. Hours later, the door opened. The professors announced their findings. "It is not a hoax. Jim answered all of our questions. He can read, spell, do arithmetic, and identify colors entirely as a result of his education." Every newspaper carried the story. Jim Key, educated by kindness. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals agreed to sponsor Jim Key's performances. After the shows, thousands of school children signed a pledge that said, "I promise to treat animals with kindness." For 9 years, Doc and Jim Key traveled the country in a custom trailer car, delighting audiences of all kinds. Then they retired to a peaceful life on Jim Key Farm, where enthusiastic fans visited, and Jim was always happy to amaze them with what he knew. Great. I hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you right after the commercial break for another one.
WOTM is the television provider for all Alabama High School Athletic Association championship events and special programs. WOTM is your home for the Super 7 football, state finals basketball, baseball and softball state championships, the AHSAA weekly show, and WOTM also produced the first ever football playoff show, Super 7 preview show, and reclassification reveal show. Your exclusive home for all things AHSAA is WOTM. Contact your local cable provider to request WOTM to your channel lineup.
A funeral service represents a family's final farewell to their loved ones. Knowing this, we go beyond what is expected to ensure the ceremony is beautiful and memorable, a truly fitting tribute to that special life. We invite you to visit us to meet our staff and tour our renovated facility complete with a new dining area and catering services. We've been serving the people of this area for over 40 years, and we think that you'll be pleased to find that making lasting impressions remains our first priority. Curtis & Son Funeral Home, Sylacauga, Childersburg.
Things a little bumpy in your driveway? Ox Foundation Solutions has the expertise and the know-how to repair cracks, wet basements and crawl spaces, and uneven floors in your home. Ox Foundation Solutions will come up with the right fix for you. It's time to get strong. How strong? Ox Strong. Get a free estimate from Ox Foundations.
Marble City Pharmacy in Sylacauga is your destination for the highest quality health care. Our knowledgeable pharmacists are always available for questions about your medications or advice on taking over-the-counter products and supplements. Our friendly staff can assist you in choosing from our full lines of compression hose and medical equipment. And don't forget our gift department. We have a great selection of unique gifts for every occasion. Stop by and see us today. Marble City Pharmacy, here for life.
Welcome back to Library Connections. The last book I'd like to share is by Dan Yaccarino, All the Way to America, the story of a big Italian family and a little shovel. My great-grandfather, McCully Yaccarino, grew up on a farm in Sorrento, Italy. When he was a boy, his father gave him a little shovel so he could help tend the zucchini, tomatoes, and strawberries that his family sold in the village. They worked very hard, but were always very poor. And so, when he was a young man, McCully left Italy and went all the way to America in search of new opportunities. Work hard, his father told him, handing him the little shovel. But remember to enjoy life and never forget your family, his mother said. She hugged him and gave him their new family photograph and her recipe for tomato sauce. It was a long journey, and how different New York was from his tiny village in Italy. Like many immigrants passing through Ellis Island at the turn of the last century, he was given a new name. McCully Yaccarino was now Michael Yaccarino. He was happy to be in America, but never forgot his family in Sorrento. Friends from home helped each other in this new country. Michael found work in a bakery owned by a man who had also come from Sorrento. Michael polished his little shovel till it shined and used it to measure out flour and sugar. Michael met Adeline, and soon they were married. They found an apartment in a neighborhood called Little Italy, where many other recent immigrants lived as well. They had 5 children and did their best to teach them to work hard, enjoy life, and love their family. Michael started his own business as a pushcart peddler and continued to use the little shovel, this time to measure out dried fruit and nuts. His oldest son was named Aniello, but everyone called him Dan. Back then, children often had to leave school to help support their families, so from the age of 12, Dan worked for his father. When Dan grew up, he married Helen. These are my grandparents. Together, Dan and Helen opened a market. They sold all sorts of wonderful Italian food. Now the little shovel belonged to Dan, and he used it to measure out beans, macaroni, and olives. Dan had always dreamed of living in the country, So he and Helen bought a house with a big yard and raised a family there. He loved having everyone over for Sunday dinners. Dan's love of cooking led him to open a restaurant. He made pizza, eggplant parmesan, and spaghetti, all with his grandmother's tomato sauce, of course. Dan's son Mike would help out in the kitchen after school. By now, the family was so large that celebrations were held at the restaurant. Everyone would come together to talk, laugh, and of course, eat. When Mike was a young man, he married Elaine. These are my parents. Mike opened a barber shop, and he used the little shovel to pour rock salt over the sidewalk whenever it snowed. I grew up in a big house in the suburbs, not far from my grandparents. We had a garden in the backyard, and I would help my father tend to the tomato plants. Every year, my parents would take my brother, my sister, and me to the Feast of San Gennaro in Little Italy. We watched the parade, listened to Italian folk songs, and ate hot zapoli. I loved New York City. So when I grew up, I moved back to the city where my great-grandfather, McCully, had lived. Work hard, my father told me, as he handed me the little shovel. But remember to enjoy life. And don't forget to call your family, said my mother. I did work hard, and after a few years, I became an author and illustrator, creating books for children. Then I married Sue, and soon our son was born. He is named Michael after my father and great-grandfather. Now I watch Michael and his sister Lucy work on our small terrace with the very same shovel that their great-grandfather brought all the way to America. We grow zucchini, tomatoes, and strawberries. I do my best to teach them to work hard, enjoy life, and love their family. I really enjoyed this story. He talks about how tracing their roots back to Italy and how you see that each family, each generation does a little bit better than the one before. So please share the story of your family with your children and any other family members. Share that with them while we can. Thank you so much for joining me on Library Connection, and we hope you will come into the library or take advantage of our drive-thru very soon.